So we will talk about embryology. Embryos are living entities within the body of their mothers. Um, Not all species have embryos. Only certain mammals have embryos. The point of the discussion is that modern embryology does not answer all questions. So there was this German scientist called Haeckel. In 1868, he wrote a book called Naturliche Schöpfungsgeschichte. So the history of natural creation. So Ernst Haeckel suggested that he had made various comparisons using human, monkey, dog embryos. And he said they all look similar and therefore all species have a common origin. That was his basis. And this he called scientific work, although there's a lot of speculation there. And then Darwin, in his book, he quoted this speculative theory as a reference in his book Descent of Man, right? So Darwin wrote a couple of publications. One is on the origin of species, where he talked about everything coming from a single source. And the second is Descent of Man. Some people realized that his illustrations or diagrams were a distortion even before Darwin wrote the book. Following the exposure of the fraud, Haeckel himself admitted there is a huge fraud, but Darwin nevertheless used that as a reference for his theory. This is what Haeckel said. After this compromising confession of forgery, I should be obliged to consider myself condemned and annihilated. If I had not the consolation of seeing side by side with me in the prisoner's dock hundreds of fellow culprits, among them many of the most trusted observers and most esteemed biologists. He's saying that among the culprits, thieves, and rogues, there are some biologists also. So he himself is one, that's what he's saying. The great majority of all the diagrams in the best of the biological textbooks, treatises, and journals would incur the same degree of charge of forgery. He's saying that the biological things that you have seen in your textbooks are all wrong, are more or less doctored. Doctored means you are creating them. Schematized. Schematized means you're putting through a basic schema, like a computer schema, and constructed means they are built rather than taken from real research. They are manufactured, artificial. But in order to keep the dogma of Darwinism propped up, there was a need to declare that one of the false pieces of evidence in their possession was actually proof of evolution. So what they did was they said that there is a proof of evolution. So the fraud perpetrated or Darwinists being aware of this was unimportant. What mattered in Darwinist eyes was it to be heralded as evidence. So they took the fraud as evidence because they wanted to move forward with their theory. So Darwin's theory relied on a fraudulent theory. So if that theory is fraud, then Darwin's theory cannot be accurate. Despite the exposure of the fraud, Darwin and the biologists who supported him continued to regard Haeckel's drawings as a reference source, and that further encouraged Haeckel. In the years that followed, he produced further series of comparative embryo illustrations. He prepared diagrams showing fish, salamander, turtle, chicken, rabbit, and human embryos side by side. Now let's look at that diagram. So he said all the starting point are the same for everything. And if you look at the bottom, some produced pig, some produced human babies, and some produced salamander, some produced fish. How is this possible, right? Some people questioned, but they didn't want to push him too much because they thought he was probably a great scientist. And this picture is there in all biology textbooks today. So the real embryos are like this. Human embryos are one kind. He said all of them are very similar. Salamander is actually a big animal, so its embryo is pretty big, not the same size as a fish embryo or a turtle embryo or a chicken embryo. So this British embryologist Michael Richardson, he examined these vertebrate embryos under a microscope and determined no resemblance to Haeckel's drawings. Right? It appeared that Haeckel had taken various template designs and distorted them in various ways so the embryos would resemble one another, which means it was forgery. What he committed is scientific forgery. He added imaginary organs to embryos, removed organs which were extra, and then so that everything looks the one and the same, right? The clefts that Haeckel depicted as gills in the human embryo had in fact nothing to do with gills at all. They were actually the middle ear canal. So because fish had gills, right? Gills means those side things, and the fish has to also breathe, so it will raise the gills. They were actually the middle ear for the human beings, but to harmonize everything, he manipulated it. The embryos did not, in fact, resemble one another at all. Haeckel made all kinds of distortions in his illustrations. So this is cheating in the name of science. An article about Haeckel's drawings, for long maintained on the agenda of false evidence, appeared in 1997 in the Science magazine. Science is considered a very popular magazine, right? So they said Haeckel's embryos, fraud rediscovered. So everybody now agrees it's a fraud. But Darwin's theory, which is based on Haeckel's theory, is still taught in school textbooks, including like when my kids went to the local school here, they came back and said, yeah, Darwin's theory, evolution, one species become other species. So the textbooks never changed, although Science magazine and the bigger scientific community realized the fraud. In reality, Richardson and his colleagues note even closely related embryos such as those of fish vary quite a bit in appearance and developmental pathway. Right? So no two fish are the same, as you can see. All you have to do is like pay $10, go to an aquarium, and you will notice the difference. No two fish are the same. So if Haeckel's drawings looks like it is turning out to be one of the most fakes in biology. So we have Trump called fake news. So this was fake news long time ago. And that fake news is still continuing. So in March 2000, Harvard University evolutionist and paleontologist, he said he had been long aware, but he preferred to remain silent as required by the system of Dagel. System of Dagel means you respect the other scientist. You don't really question them. Gould stated that it was an academic murder for them still to be used, right? And as far as I know, people are still using those things. So this is the problem with science. We trust science blindly and we don't trust religion. We think religion is, imaginary and science is real. But here we see science is also not to be trusted. Haeckel's fraud was so blatant and so great that he was accused of fraud by 5 different professors and found guilty by the Jena University Court. And yet his publications are shown in school textbooks. So this Sir Gavin de Beer from Great Britain, he says, seldom has been assertion like Haeckel's theory of recapitulation, facile, tidy, and plausible, widely accepted without critical examination, done so much harm to science. Because there was no critical examination. They said, this is it. And it has done so much harm to science. These false illustrations of Haeckel's, in fact, achieved their intended aim on behalf of evolution. So now people start believing evolution like that. Henry M. Morris, founder of the Creation Research Society and Institute of Creation Research, analyzed the state of affairs. Ever since Darwin and especially since Freud is another psychologist who has his own theories which are wrong, have assumed that man is merely an evolved animal and have evaluated his behavioral problems on animalistic basis. So that's why if you go to an average psychologist, they will treat you like an animal. So you should never go to a psychologist. You should go to more of the spiritualists, like chant Hare Krishna, go to temples, try to figure out your problems through God rather than a psychologist. They'll basically treat you with like a monkey. Experiments with monkey or other animals, even with insects, are used in guidance to deal with human problems. If you look at any psychology book, right, they say, oh, we did this experiment with 16 rats in the laboratory, and then we found these results. So we will release this medicine for human consumption. Now, how is a human the same as a rat? So if it worked on rats, does it mean it will work on me? Unfortunately, this is pharmacy or pharmaceutical industry.
And I think rats are majority, right? I mean, vastly used compared to other animals. I don't know why.
Yeah. they can easily be killed. That's probably why they do experiments, right? You'll not find so many monkeys, but rats are available in everybody's garage. There are rats, so they'll do experiments on rats in America typically. In Europe, America, most places of the world. So this is what's happening. Unfortunate, but science is actually cheating. So one molecular biologist, Jonathan Wells, described as many textbooks use slightly read-on version of Haeckel's embryos. One edition example is 1999 edition of Peter Raven and George Johnson's Biology. And it has the caption, notice that the early embryonic stages of these vertebrates bear a striking resemblance to each other. And the text also informs students some of the strongest anatomical evidence supporting evolution comes from comparison of how organisms develop. But if the theory itself is wrong, then how can you say evolution is right? Right? Because they are all saying we came from monkeys. No. We came from God. We came from Krishna. He is our eternal father. Other examples, 1998 edition of C.C. Starr and Ralph Taggart's Biology. Unity and Diversity of Life, which accompanies its drawings with misstatement that the early embryos of vertebrates strongly resemble one another. One fact of embryology that pushed Darwin towards the idea of evolution is that early embryos of most vertebrates closely resemble one another. So they're taking this whole basis for Darwinism as Haeckel's embryo theory, which itself is wrong. Right? And somebody else made the statement, an animal's embryonic development holds clues to the forms of its ancestors. So they are tying everything to this single source from which everything evolved. So if your foundation is bad, the whole building will collapse some point. Same thing is happening here. The foundation itself is wrong. So Jonathan Wells makes this comment about this lie deliberately maintained. Haeckel's embryo seems to provide such powerful evidence for Darwin's theory. But they are wrong. You have to realize that. Yet biologists have known for over a century that Haeckel faked his drawings. Furthermore, the stage Haeckel labeled as first is actually midway through development. What he started as the first point, starting point, also wrong. The similarities exaggerated are preceded by striking differences. Although you might never know it from reading biology, Darwin's strongest single class of facts is a classic example of how evidence can be twisted to fit a theory. So you come up with a theory, man came from monkey, and take the evidence and somehow force fit it. It was thus once again proved how Darwinism was in a constant need of a lie. People clearly saw how evolutionists could turn a blind eye to a fraud. So if you look at embryonic science from Srimad Bhagavatam, although not verified by modern medical science and perhaps even contradictory to their findings, Sri Kapila in the Srimad Bhagavatam, he describes in the third canto that the baby suffers immensely in the womb. Its soft body is bitten by hungry worms, so much that the baby becomes unconscious because of its tender body. The baby also suffers intolerable pain all over its body caused by food consumed by the mother that is excessively bitter or pungent, salty or sour, too hot or too cold. The baby feels like a bird in a cage without freedom of movement. Then it is said to be, by some good fortune, baby remembers the previous 100 births and grieves piteously. So when we were the babies in the mommy's stomach, we were crying out, oh my God, I did so many sins in my last 100 lifetimes. When I come out, I will serve my Lord. Being in a frightful condition, he prays to Bhagavan for his release. So these prayers are described in 10 verses beginning from Srimad Bhagavatam 3rd canto, 31st chapter, 12th verse. So there's an Upanishad called Garbhopanishad, so which really translates into esoteric doctrine over the embryo, one of the major, they call it minor Upanishad, but it's one of the Upanishad. You cannot really say one is important than the other, more important than the other. There are 108 Upanishad texts, so written in the Sanskrit, It's in the Yajurveda. This Upanishad gives in detail about how conception takes place in the womb and how it develops over a period of 9 months. After the union takes place of the man and the woman, the growth of the body in the embryo on the first day is a nodule, becomes a bubble by 7th night. 15th night, it becomes a lump. In a month's time, it's hard. End of 2 months, head is formed. Parts of the feet appear by 3 months. Stomach, hips, and ankle appear. The vertebral column shapes. Then the face, nose, ears appear. Right? And according to the Garbho Upanishad, the soul is introduced in the 7th month. The soul is impregnated. But according to some of the other Shastras, the soul is impregnated at the same time as the conception. Sure, we have to do more research as to when the soul actually comes into the body. Is it at the 7th month? Is it at the 1st month? Is it at the moment, the night of the conception? So, but the soul is there. It's just a matter of when it's getting introduced. We need to do a little bit more research. For the gender of the child, if the male semen dominates, it will be a male child. And if the female fluid dominates, then it is the girl child, like that. When they are both of equal strength, then hermaphrodite occurs. Means it will be neither male nor female, like Hijra, as they say. Birth defects are asserted to result when either parent is suffering from anxiety or trauma. So that's why before conceiving, the man and the woman should chant Hare Krishna mantra, invite a good soul. If you just go to a bar, get drunk, and after that have sex and have a baby, who knows what kind of baby you'll have, right? So that's why Garbhadana Samskara is a very important point. So how do twins come? When Shukra and Shonita burst into two, or if parents have sex too many times, right? So before the first baby is formed, one more sexual activity will cause the semen and the Shonita to come together, and the second child is also produced there. So it will become twins. But then think of people having sextuplets, 6 kids, right? So yeah, there's so many things that are happening. That's why it has to be scientifically conceived. It's not like a random act when you want to have a kid. So by the 8th month, according to the Upanishad, embryo knows its past birth, meditates and perceives, gaining the intuitive knowledge of good and bad. It's praying to Om. Om is Krishna. Pranava Sarva Vedeshu, he says. When you say Om, you are referring to me. Just like we say Krishna means you are calling the Lord. If you say Om Krishnaya means Mr. Krishna. Just like you say Mr. in front of some gentleman, you are prefacing it with Om. The text says that the last week of the development, the fetus remembers the good and bad karma. And being born anew through many births, resolves to remember Narayana or Vishnu. Resolves to study the practice of Sankhya Yoga. It will say all these things, but then it will come out, it forgets its resolutions. It will say, oh Krishna, oh Narayana, I will remember you, I will serve you. We all did that. But when we came out, we are coding in C#, Java, and C++. We have forgotten our resolution to go back to Krishna. So human body has 5 elements. We have been discussing this many times. I don't think I need to repeat this. Earth, air, water, fire, ether. So according to this Upanishad, there are many dhatus. From the proper combination of the qualities, 6 types of rasa, taste, emerge. From the relish of the food, blood is created. From that, flesh is created. From that, fat. From that, bones. From that, marrow. And from that, semen. So it takes like 1,000 kgs of food to produce 2 drops of semen. So that's why semen should be protected. If it's wasted, one will die faster. So too much sex is bad for health. So many, like it takes, I think, if I remember correct, 100 drops of blood produces 1 drop of semen. So something like 100 drops of blood produces certain amount of flesh. So many drops of flesh produces so many drops of fat, like that. So semen is the most concentrated form of your energy, more than bone marrow, right? When people have cancer, they are given bone marrow transplant. So this is even more powerful than that semen. So one has to protect it. Use it only when necessary, not like having sex every day and then wasting it. You're cutting down your life when you do that. So, Shriyante yat shariraha, right? So, what is Shriyante? Existence of what? 3 fires: fire for knowledge, fire for seeing, and the gastric digestive fire. So, these 3 fires put together form the body. So, body may look like 2 hands, 2 legs, and all that, but if you distill it all to the basics, this is what's happening. There is a fire for knowledge, fire for seeing, and the gastric fire. And then there are some statistics. We know this from modern science as well. There is no difference between modern science and this Vedic science. But Vedic science has something about Atma. Modern science doesn't accept Atma, or it doesn't accept the fires in the body. So the whole universe is full of life, right? So even tree has a life. Only thing, tree is a standing man, and man is a walking tree, if you want to think of it like that. So here are some references. And that brings us to the end of this section. Hare Krishna.